The first thing folks noticed was the cold. Not the usual February bite that stings your cheeks and sends you stomping your boots, but a deep, bone-heavy cold that seemed to settle into the ground itself. It came early that year, rolling across the valley like a warning no one quite understood. Fences creaked, trees snapped in the night, and even the river slowed to a sluggish crawl under sheets of gray ice. Out past the last line of cabins, where the road thinned into little more than a frozen track, stood her place. A small log cabin, old even by local standards, tucked against a rise of land that blocked most of the wind. Folks said it had been built before the town had a name, back when men measured winters by survival instead of calendars. She lived there alone? That alone was enough to stir talk. Not loud talk, not the kind said to your face, but the quiet kind that passed between hands warming over stoves. People wondered how she managed, especially in a winter like this one. Supplies ran thin even in town, and every household counted their woodpile like it was gold. You could tell a man's chances by the height of his stacked logs. And hers, well, that was the trouble. There was no woodpile. One morning, a pair of hunters passing by noticed it first. They slowed near the edge of her property, squinting through the blowing snow. No stacked logs by the wall. No fresh chopping marks, no sign of split wood drying under a lean-to. Just a bare yard, smooth with untouched snow. One of them muttered that maybe she had moved away. The other shook his head. Smoke had been seen from her chimney the night before, thin but steady against the dark sky. Smoke without wood. By afternoon, the story had reached the general store. By evening, it had grown legs. Some said she must be burning furniture. Others claimed she had hidden stores inside the cabin. A few, lowering their voices, suggested something less ordinary. In a winter that harsh, people were quick to believe in strange things. A small group finally decided to check on her. Not out of curiosity alone, though there was plenty of that, but because winter had a way of turning small problems into graves if left too long. They made the walk the next morning. The wind fought them the whole way, pushing against their coats and filling their tracks as fast as they made them. When they reached the cabin, it stood quiet and still, the kind of still that made a person hold their breath without knowing why. Up close, the mystery deepened. No axe marks on the doorframe. No wood chips scattered near the steps. Not even a stray log tucked away. Just that same smooth blanket of snow, as if nothing had been disturbed in weeks. But the chimney told a different story. A thin ribbon of smoke curled upward, steady and calm, like the cold didn't touch it at all. They knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind howled past them, rattling the edges of the roof. Then, slowly, the door opened just enough to show her face. Pale from the winter light, but not weak, not worried. She looked at them like she had been expecting the visit. Someone spoke up, asking the question they had all carried there. How she was keeping warm with no woodpile in February. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened the door a little wider and stepped aside, letting them see inside. The room was warmer than it had any right to be. The fire in the stove burned low but steady, not the desperate blaze of someone running out, but the quiet, controlled burn of someone who had plenty. Plenty of what, no one could say. Then she turned, walked to the far corner of the cabin, and lifted a rug from the floor. Beneath it was a hatch. One of the men stepped forward, drawn by something he couldn't name. The others followed, boots thudding softly on the wooden boards. When the hatch creaked open, a rush of colder air slipped out, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and fresh-cut timber. They leaned in and looked down. At first, their eyes struggled in the dim light. Then shapes began to form, stacked tight and deep, row after row disappearing into the dark. Wood, not a few logs, not a hidden stash for a week or two. Cords upon cords, packed beneath the ground like a secret meant to outlast the winter itself. 30 cords, someone whispered. And as they stood there staring into that impossible store, one question settled over them heavier than the cold outside. If it was all down there, buried and sealed, then who had been bringing it up to the fire each night without leaving a single trace above the snow? No one spoke for a while after that. The cold from below drifted up through the open hatch, brushing past their boots and rising into the warm room. It carried the smell of fresh-cut wood, not old or rotting, but sharp and clean like it had been split not long ago. That alone didn't make sense. 30 cords of wood did not just appear fresh under frozen ground in the middle of February. One of the men cleared his throat and shifted his weight. He glanced back at the doorway, then at the woman. She stood near the stove, hands calm at her sides, watching them in a way that made it hard to tell what she was thinking. "You haul all that down there yourself?" he asked, trying to sound steady. She gave a small nod, but it wasn't the kind that answered anything. It felt more like a way to close the question without truly touching it. Another man knelt near the opening, peering deeper into the darkness. He leaned farther than was comfortable, squinting as if the truth might come into focus if he stared hard enough. "There's no tracks outside," he said. "Snow's clean as a sheet." "Been that way for days?" That was true. They had all seen it on the walk-up. The wind had not been strong enough to hide footprints that recent. And yet there was nothing. No sign of hauling, no drag marks, no path worn from cabin to woodpile, because there was no woodpile at all. The woman stepped closer then, slow and quiet. She reached down and pulled the hatch halfway shut, not enough to hide what lay beneath, but enough to dim it like she was careful about how much of it should be seen at once. "Winter comes every year," she said, her voice even. "Some folks just prepare different." It sounded simple, almost ordinary, but it didn't sit right. Everyone in that room had lived through enough winters to know what preparation looked like. It meant stacking wood in the fall, cutting more when you could, watching your supply shrink day by day. It meant worry. This was something else. One of the hunters rubbed his hands together and looked around the cabin. The walls were lined with simple things. A table, a few chairs, a bed tucked into the corner. Nothing out of place, nothing that hinted at hidden work or extra help. "You been alone out here long?" he asked. She looked at him, and for the first time there was a flicker of something in her expression. Not fear, not quite. More like a memory she didn't care to share. "Long enough," she said. The answer hung in the air like the cold outside. An older man in the group, one who had seen more winters than most, stepped forward. He didn't look down into the hatch. He looked at the floor around it. His eyes moved slowly, taking in the boards, the edges, the way the rug had been placed. "There's no where," he said quietly. "If you've been hauling wood up from there every day, these boards would show it." No one argued with him. He was right. The floor looked almost untouched, smooth in a way that didn't match the story of daily use. The woman didn't respond. Outside, the wind gave a hard push against the cabin, making the walls creak. For a second, the fire in the stove flickered and the room dipped into a softer light. It made the shadows stretch longer, especially near the far corner where the hatch lay half closed. One of the younger men shifted closer to the door. "Maybe we should head back," he muttered. "Storm's picking up." But no one moved just yet. The hunter near the hatch reached down and picked up a small piece of wood from just inside the opening. It was cleanly split, dry, and lighter than he expected. He turned it in his hand, studying the grain. "This was cut recent," he said. "No checking, no deep cracks." "It ain't been sitting long." That brought a quiet tension into the room. If the wood was fresh, then it had been cut sometime during the deep freeze. But no one in town had seen or heard any chopping from this place. Sound carried far in winter. An axe striking wood would echo across the fields. They all knew that. The woman walked back to the stove and added a small log to the fire. It caught almost instantly, burning with a steady flame. She didn't rush, didn't look at them again. "You came to see if I was in trouble," she said. "You've seen I'm not." It was a clear dismissal, but it didn't settle anything. As they turned to leave, one by one, each man took a last look at the floor, at the hatch, at the quiet, steady fire that seemed to ask no questions and give no answers. Outside, the wind hit them harder than before, but it wasn't the cold that made them uneasy. It was the thought that stayed with them as they walked back toward town. If the wood below was fresh and no one had seen or heard it being cut, then it wasn't just the hauling that had no tracks. It was the chopping, too. And in a valley where every sound carried in winter, that kind of silence did not come easy. By the time they reached town, the story had already outrun them. Word traveled fast in winter, faster than a man could walk when the cold pressed at his back. By the time the group pushed open the door of the general store, Folks inside were already turning, already asking questions they didn't yet have answers to. 30 cords underground, no woodpile. Fresh cut timber in the dead of February. The stove at the center of the store crackled as people gathered close, boots stomping snow loose on the floor. The men who had seen it spoke in turns, each adding a piece, each trying to keep it plain and sensible. But no matter how simple they kept their words, the thing itself would not settle into something ordinary. An old trapper leaned back against a barrel and shook his head slowly. "You don't hide that much wood unless you got reason," he said. "And you don't cut it fresh in weather like this without making a sound." A younger fellow, new to the valley, laughed under his breath. "Maybe she cut it in the fall and just keeps it down there," he said. "No mystery to that." The trapper looked at him, not unkind, but firm. "Wood don't stay that fresh if it's been sitting months. You'd know that if you'd split any." The room quieted a little after that. In the corner, a woman who lived 2 cabins over from the edge of town spoke up. She had passed by the lone cabin more times than most. "I've never seen her haul a thing," she said. "Not in summer, not in fall. She keeps to herself. Always has." That stirred another layer of talk. Some remembered seeing her years back, walking into town for flour or salt. Others said they hadn't seen her in so long they thought she might have left. No one could point to a clear timeline. It was like she had always been there, but never in a way that drew attention. The storm outside picked up as the day wore on. Snow came down thicker, the kind that blurred the line between sky and ground. By evening, the road to her place was nearly gone again, covered over as if the land itself wanted to hide the path. Still, not everyone was willing to leave it alone. The 2 hunters who had first noticed the missing woodpile sat near the window, speaking low. One of them kept glancing out toward the direction of the cabin, though there was nothing to see but white and wind. "We could go back," he said finally. "In this?" the other replied. "Not now. Tomorrow, first light." The second hunter didn't answer right away. He rubbed his jaw, thinking it through. "And what are we looking for exactly?" That question hung between them. Tracks, maybe. Signs of chopping. Some mark in the snow or on the land that would make the whole thing fit into the way the world was supposed to work. "Something," the first one said. "Anything that makes sense." Across the room, the old trapper had been listening. He pushed himself upright and walked over, slow but steady. "If you go," he said, "you pay attention to more than just the ground." They both looked at him. "What do you mean?" one asked. The trapper nodded toward the door, toward the storm. "Sound carries in winter, you know that, but silence does too. You notice what's missing just as much as what's there." The words settled heavy. That night, sleep didn't come easy for many in town. The wind howled through gaps in walls, rattled shutters, and sent loose snow tapping against windows like fingers asking to be let in. More than one person found themselves listening, not just to the storm, but to the spaces between it. A few swore they heard something distant, faint, and steady, like the dull rhythm of an axe striking wood. But when they held their breath and tried to follow it, it was gone. Morning came gray and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried fresh and deep. The 2 hunters set out early, joined this time by the older trapper, and one more from town who said little but watched everything. The walk felt longer than before. When they reached the rise where her cabin stood, they slowed without meaning to. Something about the place felt different, though nothing obvious had changed. The yard lay smooth again, untouched by tracks. The chimney sent up that same thin ribbon of smoke, but there was something else now. The trapper raised a hand, stopping the others. He tilted his head slightly, listening. At first, there was only the wind moving through the trees. Then, faint but clear, came a sound from somewhere beneath the ground, a slow, steady knock, wood striking wood. And it wasn't coming from the cabin above. The 4 of them stood still, as if moving might scare the sound away. It came again, dull and steady. Wood striking wood, not loud, not hurried, but patient. The kind of rhythm a person falls into when they have been working for a long time and see no need to rush. The younger hunter swallowed. "You hear that too," he said, though he already knew the answer. The trapper nodded once. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground between the cabin and the rise. Ain't coming from inside, he said quietly. It's lower. A thin wind swept across the yard, brushing loose snow and soft waves. For a moment the surface shifted just enough to reveal something faint beneath. Not a track, not quite. More like a shallow settling in the snow, as if the ground had given way and then stilled again. Right there, the quiet man said, pointing. They moved closer, careful with their steps. Each boot sank deep, the snow dry and soft from the storm. The knocking stopped as they approached, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. No one spoke. The trapper crouched and brushed away a layer of snow with his glove. Beneath it, the ground was not as solid as it should have been. There was a slight give, like packed earth that had been disturbed and then covered over. He pressed down harder. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft crack, the surface shifted just enough to send a small drift sliding into a narrow seam they hadn't seen before. All four men froze. The seam ran crooked, no wider than a finger at first, then stretching out toward the side of the cabin where the foundation met the rise. It was too straight to be natural, too clean to be anything but made. A tunnel, one of the hunters whispered. The words settled over them like the cold itself. If there was a tunnel, then the wood below wasn't just stored. It was being moved, quietly, carefully, hidden from sight. The trapper leaned closer, listening again. At first there was nothing, then, faint as before, the knocking returned. Not from beneath their feet now, but farther off, deeper under the rise. He looked toward the cabin. Smoke still rose steady from the chimney, thin and calm. Whatever was happening below, the fire above kept burning like nothing was out of place. She knows we're here, the younger hunter said. It wasn't a question. As if in answer, the cabin door creaked open. They all turned at once. She stood there in the doorway, wrapped in a heavy coat, her face calm but set in a way that left no room for easy talk. The wind tugged at the edge of her coat, but she didn't seem to feel it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then she stepped out onto the snow and closed the door behind her. The sound of the latch settling into place felt louder than it should have. You came back, she said. The trapper straightened slowly. We heard something, he replied. Thought it best to see. Her eyes moved past them, settling on the disturbed patch of ground. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked like someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. That ground ain't safe to stand on, she said. Not where you're stepping. The quiet man shifted back instinctively, but the others held their place. What's down there? One of the hunters asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked a few steps closer, stopping just short of the seam in the snow. The knocking sound below had stopped again, leaving only the wind moving across the rise. You ever had a winter take everything from you? She asked. The question caught them off guard. No one spoke. Her gaze drifted past them, out toward the valley, where the town lay hidden under snow and distance. Years back, she continued, before most of you paid any mind to this place, the cold came worse than this, stayed longer too. Folks weren't ready. The trapper's expression changed, just a little. He remembered. Not clearly, but enough to know the kind of winter she meant. We lost more than we should have, she said. All because we thought we knew what winter was capable of. The wind picked up again, pushing loose snow along the ground. The seam widened just slightly, enough for a faint breath of colder air to slip through. And now? The younger hunter asked, his voice quieter than before. She looked back at him, then down at the ground beneath their feet. Now I make sure it don't happen again. Another sound rose from below, louder this time. Not just a single knock, but several, uneven and shifting, like more than one strike. Like movement. All four men felt it then, not just in their ears, but through the ground itself. A faint vibration, steady and real. The quiet man stepped back another pace. There's more going on down there than wood, he said. No one argued. The trapper took a slow breath, eyes fixed on the seam as it stretched a little wider, the snow around it sinking just enough to show the edge of something below. Not open space, structure. Reinforced beams, packed earth shaped by careful hands. A passage running deeper than any simple storage pit had a right to go. He looked at her, the question clear without needing words. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was something close to urgency in her voice. If you're going to understand it, she said. "You'll have to come down and see." The ground gave a soft, settling shift beneath them, the seam widening just enough to hint at an opening forming. And from below, the knocking didn't stop this time. It grew stronger. For a moment, no one moved. The sound from below had changed. It was no longer a distant knock. It was closer now, clearer, like work being done just out of sight. The ground beneath their boots felt alive in a way that made each of them uneasy. The trapper looked at the others, then back at her. "If we go down," he said, "we go together?" She nodded once. "That's how it's meant to be." She stepped forward and brushed more snow away from the seam. With a careful push, the edge gave way, revealing a narrow wooden hatch built into the earth itself. It had been hidden well, packed and covered so clean that no one would have known it was there, unless the ground shifted. She pulled it open. A cold breath rose up, deeper and richer than the air above. It carried that same scent of fresh-cut wood, but stronger now, mixed with the smell of earth and something steady, something worked and lived in. A ladder led down into the dim. The trapper went first. The others followed, one by one, boots finding each rung as they descended. The light faded as they moved lower, but not completely. A warm glow flickered from below, soft and steady. When they reached the bottom, they stopped. The space opened wider than any of them expected. It was not a small pit or a simple storage room. It was a long, reinforced tunnel, carved and supported with thick beams, the walls packed tight with earth. Lanterns hung at intervals, their light steady and calm. And there, moving through that underground space, were people, not strangers, not shadows. People they knew. Men from the edge of town, a boy who helped at the store, an older woman who had lost her husband a few winters back. They moved with purpose, passing logs from one section to another, stacking, sorting, working together in a rhythm that matched the steady sound they had heard above. The younger hunter blinked in disbelief. "What is this?" The woman climbed down last and stepped beside them. "What should have been done a long time ago," she said. One of the men below noticed them and walked over, wiping his hands on his coat. He gave a small nod, not surprised to see them. "Figured you'd come looking," he said. The trapper looked around slowly. "All this time," he said, "this has been under our feet." The man nodded. "Started small? Just a place to keep wood dry. But after that bad winter we kept building, quietly, a few at a time. Folks who understood what it meant to run out." The older woman nearby set down a bundle of kindling and joined them. "Not everyone wanted to hear it," she said gently. "Some thought it was worry for nothing. So we kept it to ourselves, worked when we could, stored what we could." "And the fresh wood?" one of the hunters asked. She smiled faintly. "Cut in sections farther out where the trees are thicker, brought in through side tunnels. Snow covers the rest. No need for tracks near the cabin." It began to make sense. Piece by piece. The silence, the missing signs, the steady fire above. "This isn't just for you," the trapper said, turning to the woman. She shook her head. "It never was. It's for anyone who needs it. When winter gets worse than expected, when wood runs low, no one has to face it alone." The words settled deep. Above them, the world was still cold and uncertain. Storms would come again, supplies would thin. But down here, there was something different. Planning, effort, people working together instead of waiting for trouble to find them. The younger hunter let out a slow breath. "You could have told the town," he said. "We are telling them now," she replied. "You came. You saw. That's how it starts." The trapper gave a small nod, a quiet understanding passing through him. "We'll help," he said. "All of us." Others around the tunnel looked up at that, and for the first time there was a sense of something lifting. Not the cold, not the winter, but the weight of facing it alone. They spent the next hours learning the paths, the work, the way the wood was moved and stored. When they finally climbed back up into the daylight, the cold hit them again, sharp and real, but it felt different now. The cabin stood as it always had, small and quiet against the rise. No woodpile in sight. Just smooth snow and a thin line of smoke rising into the pale sky. But now they knew what lay beneath. As they walked back toward town, the wind at their backs, the story no longer felt like a mystery to be feared. It felt like something to be shared. By the time they reached the general store, the telling had changed. It was no longer about a woman with no woodpile in February. It was about a hidden store, 30 cords strong, built not out of fear, but out of care. And in the days that followed, more hands joined the work below ground. The tunnels grew a little wider, the stacks a little higher. The silence remained, but it was no longer empty. It was full of purpose. That winter still held its bite, and the cold did not ease early. But when the worst nights came, no one in the valley sat by a dying fire wondering if it would be enough. Because beneath the snow, beneath the quiet land, something steady burned on. Not just wood, but the simple promise that no one would be left out in the cold again.